Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today, our group will present about the problem of evil as a challenge to theism and atheistic critique. Introduction. Focus on one of the central debate in the philosophy of religion, the relationship between the existence of God and the evil and the reality of evil and suffering. The problem of evil is considered one of the strongest challenges to monotheistic theism because it questions whether an omnigod can exist in a world filled with suffering. According to James R. Beebe, if God is all-knowing, God would be aware of all suffering. If God is all-powerful, God would be able to eliminate suffering. Furthermore, if God is morally perfect, God would want to prevent suffering. However, evil and suffering continue to exist. This study examines the view of David Hume, an 18th century Scottish philosopher and a skeptic, in dialogues concerning natural religion. Hume used the problem of evil to challenge the coherence of the concept of an omnigod. Therefore, this study aimed to analyze how Hume employed the problem of evil as a challenge to theism, evaluate the logical and evidential dimension of suffering, and examine the effectiveness of contemporary theism responses.
Moving on to the problem statement of this study. The core issue here revolves around the traditional conflict in the philosophy of religion. How can an omnigod who is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good coexist with the harsh reality of world suffering? While David Hume heavily utilized this dilemma in his writing to attack theism, there is still a lack of systematic analysis on exactly how his classical arguments are reinforced by modern premise, specifically the logical and evidential problem of evil. We need to evaluate how far his critique truly succeed in undermining the theistic worldview. Furthermore, although theists have defended their stance using major theodicies such as the free will defense and soul-making theodicy, the actual effectiveness of this response against Hume's specific argument remain highly contested and under-examined. Therefore, this study is driven by the need to critically analyze Hume's critique, assess the strength added by the logical and evidential problems, and finally evaluate whether theistic defense can genuinely survive this challenge.
We move to the research questions. First, how does David Hume use the problem of evil to challenge the theistic concept of an omnigod? Second, how do the logical and evidential problem of evil supports and strengthens Hume's atheistic critique of theism? And lastly, how far do the free will defense and soul-making theodicies succeed in defending theism against the problem of evil? Next is research objective. First, to examine how David Hume employs the problem of evil to challenge the theistic concept of an omnigod. Second, to analyze how the logical and evidential problem of evil supports and strengthens Hume's atheistic critique of theism. And lastly, to evaluate the extent to which the free will defense and the soul-making theodicy successfully defend theism against the problem of evil.
Research methodology. This study adopts a qualitative, library-based research designed to critically analyze philosophical arguments related to the problem of evil. The primary source of data is David Hume dialogues concerning natural religion, particularly parts 10 and 11, where he presents his central critique of theism. This section examines David Hume's critique on theism through the problem of evil. Hume argues that the reality of human suffering presents a serious challenge to the concept of an omnigod, which refers to the deity that is all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good. According to the traditional theism, these attributes are essential characteristics of a perfect being. However, Hume questioned whether such a being can logically exist in a world filled with evil and suffering. In dialogue concerning natural religion, Hume revived the Epicurean paradox through the character of Philo. The paradox asks, if God is willing to prevent evil but unable to do so, then God is not all-powerful. If God is able to prevent evil but unwilling to do so, then God cannot be perfectly good. If God is both willing and able, then why does evil exist? Through this argument, Hume concludes that the existence of evil creates a logical contradiction within the concept of an omnilogical analysis, Hume also appeals to empirical observation. He points to natural disaster, disease, and the suffering experienced by animals as evidence that the world contains significant and unnecessary suffering. Hume further challenges common religious responses or theodicy. He argued that the free will defense cannot account for natural evils such as earthquakes and disease. Because this event occur independently of human choice, he also questioned whether extreme suffering is truly necessary for moral or spiritual development. According to Russell, Hume's arguments were intended not to challenge religious doctrine but also to weaken the intellectual foundation of religious authority. Ultimately, Hume concluded that the existence of omnigod appeared inconsistent with both logical reasoning and human experience. His critique forced theism to reconsider either the traditional attributes of God or the explanation for the existence of evil.
Analyzing how the logical and evidential problems of evil support and strengthen Hume's atheistic critique of theism. This part includes three main points. Thus the logical problem of evil, the evidential problem of evil, empirical evidence of suffering, and the connection of modern philosophy, William Robbie. Let us begin with our first core point, the logical problem of evil and divine frugality. As we know, the logical problem of evil argues that the coexistence of an omnipotent, means omniscient, and omnibenevolent, but alongside real-world evil is a logical contradiction. Hume explored this tension through the lens of what he calls strict frugality. Hume argues that if God's power is supposedly inexhaustible, there is no logical reason for nature to distribute survival faculties to living creatures in such a stingy or past-present manner. Hume boldly asserts that a truly powerful and good deity would have designed a better system, perhaps treating fewer animals but endowing them with a massive surplus of capabilities for their happiness and preservation. Because the world does not show this infinite benevolence, Hume offers four logical hypotheses regarding the first cause of the universe. It could be perfectly good, perfectly malicious, a mixture of both, or completely indifferent. Hume concludes that because nature operates on blind, uniform law with mixed outcomes, natural reason heavily points to the fourth hypothesis, absolute moral indifference. Moving on to our second slide, the evidential problem. This argument states that the sheer amount and intensity of suffering made a lowering God highly improbable. Hume highlights four structural flaws built into nature that cause this inescapable pain. First, pain as a motivator. Agony is used for survival instead of a simple decrease in pleasure. Second, blind general laws. Rigid laws cause natural disaster without any divine intervention to stop them. Third, rigid economic. Living things have barely enough power to survive, leaving zero room for accidents. 4. Inaccurate workmanship. Natural resources overshoot this flood or undershoot into drought. This exposes a major blind spot, like animal suffering. Unlike human pain, animal suffering cannot be justified as a moral test or punishment. As C.S. Lewis admitted, beasts have no sin or ritual, so they cannot deserve pain. Therefore, this purposeless structural proof the universe is morally blind. Finally, we look at William Robbie, who modernized Hume's empirical focus in the 20th century through the concept of gratuitous evil, meaning completely pointless suffering. Robbie presents his famous pond example: a lightning bolt strikes a tree, causing a remote forest fire. The helpless pond is trapped, terribly burned, and suffers for days before dying alone. This scenario directly solidified Hume's argument. No human sin, no moral lesson is learned, and no sin is punished. The pain is completely useless. In conclusion, both Hume and Robbie demonstrate that real-world data does not reflect a loving creator. Instead, the overwhelming evidence points to a supreme cause that is entirely indifferent to moral values, making orthodox theism highly irrational.
Next, Alvin Plantinga's view on free will and moral evil. Alvin Plantinga's free will defense argued that the existence of moral evil is logically compatible with the existence of an all-good and all-powerful God. According to this defense, human beings possess genuine free will, meaning they are truly free to choose their own actions. Because of this freedom, humans can choose to do good, but they can also choose to do evil. A world that contains free human beings is more valuable than a world in which God controls every human actions. If God were to control all human action, then human beings would not be truly free. True freedom necessarily includes the possibility of making wrong choices. Moral evil arises when humans misuse their free will, not because God causes evil itself. Therefore, the existence of moral evil does not contradict the existence of a God who is both all good and all powerful. The next part is Plotinus's response to Mackey's logical problem of evil. Alvin Plotinus successfully responded to J.L. Mackey's logical problem of evil by showing that it is logically possible for an all-good and all-powerful God to allow the existence of more evil without contradiction. As a result, the presence of more evil does not logically disprove the existence of God. Through his free will defense and the concept of threshold depravity, Plotinus challenges Mackey's claim that God could have created free beings who always choose to do good. Plotinus argues that if human beings possess genuine free will, God cannot control or determine their choices. Because freedom is real and meaningful, it cannot guarantee that free beings will always choose what is morally good. Although Plotinus does not attempt to solve the evidential problem of evil or explain why there is so much evil in this world, his argument remains significant. Many philosophers accept his reasoning as successfully defeating the logical version of the problem of evil, as it demonstrates that belief in an all-good and all-powerful God is logically consistent with the existence of moral evil. We move to the next part. Human critique shows the limit of the free will defense, especially regarding natural evil. The weaknesses of the free will defense become evident when examined through the Maxian perspective. Hume maintains that God could limit the harmful use of human freedom without abolishing freedom altogether. This will question the central claim of the free will defense, which asserts that human freedom alone is enough to justify the existence of suffering. An all-powerful God, according to this critic, should be capable of intervening in specific cases, such as preventing an act of murder, while still preserving overall human free will. As a result, human freedom cannot be considered a sufficient explanation for the presence of extreme suffering in the world. Moreover, the free will defense does not adequately address the problem of natural evil, which occurs independently of human choices. Phenomena such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and serious illness affecting children arise without any connection to deliberate human action. Since this form of evil do not stem from free will, they cannot be accounted for by claims about this misuse of human freedom. Hume therefore concludes that liberty fails to resolve this issue, underscoring the limitation of the free will defense in explaining natural evil.
Next, we move to the problem of evil as a challenge to theism and atheistic critique. The problem of evil questions how an all-powerful and all-loving God can allow suffering and evil to exist in the world. Based on David Hume's critique, David Hume presents one of the stronger atheistic arguments against theism. He used the analogy of an architect who builds a house with a leaking roof. We would not praise the architect for testing the patience of the residents, but instead see it as a flaw in the design. Likewise, Hume argues that excessive suffering in the world appears unnecessary. He asks, if God is perfectly good, why does suffering exist? If suffering is intended by God, then God may not be fully benevolent. If it is against His will, then He may not be all-powerful. Next, we see on John Hick's soul-making theodicy. In response, John Hick argues that suffering has a purpose. According to his soul-making theodicy, humans are not created morally perfect but must develop spiritually. Hick sees the world as a place for moral growth rather than a paradise. He argues that virtues such as courage, generosity, and compassion can only exist when there is danger, need, and suffering. Lastly, we look on the criticism of Hick. However, critics argue that Hicks' explanation is not convincing. Suffering in the real world is often random and unfair. For example, the death of a child from starvation does not appear to build character but instead causes destruction. Therefore, many atheists believe Hicks' theory fails to answer Hume's challenge. In conclusion, Hume argues that the existence of evil challenges the traditional concept of God. Although he attempts to defend theism through soul-making, many critics maintain that the problem of evil remains one of the strongest arguments against theism. To conclude our presentation, the topic "The Problem of Evil" clearly shows that intense suffering is the biggest challenge to the belief in God. David Hume's arguments prove that a loving, all-powerful God just doesn't align with the cruel reality of our world. This critique is super strong because it uses real-world evidence like animal pet or William Rowe's story of a fawn dying in a forest fire. It shows nature is morally indifferent when religious thinkers try to defend God using their free will defense. They fail because they cannot explain natural disasters like tsunamis or cancer. Next, John Hicks' soul-making. John Hicks' soul-making theory says the world is a spiritual school to make us better, but Hume completely crushes this with his leaky roof analogy. If an architect builds a house with a leaking roof, you don't praise him for testing your patience, it just shows bad design. In reality, extreme suffering like starvation just crushes the soul. It doesn't improve it. In the end, by claiming that God cannot intervene to change the laws of nature, this religious explanation accidentally makes God look helpless. Therefore, David Hume's atheistic critique is successful. The heavy reality of evil is truly incompatible with the traditional concept of God.